I'm Emmanuel, Chea, the Regional Chairman of the West Africa Youth Assembly. I'm honored to speak as the first panelist on a subject that deeply affects our continent's peacekeeping, security operations in Africa. So firstly, I will go into the setting of our discussions, and then later on give you some little background about what we experience in Africa. So today we must ask few questions. First of all, we should understand who developed peace in Africa, who leads it, and who benefit from it. These are first things we need to look at. So peacekeeping in Africa has become one of the most international supported operations. Yes, African play the least commanding roles in them. From Liberia to Mali to the DRC, peacekeeping missions have brought moment of calm, but they also have raised questions about accountability, cultural relevance, and long-term sustainability. Now, let's look at the core African concern on the issue of peacekeeping. Let me highlight a few core concerns we offer from our communities, leaders, and youth. Lack of African leadership in peace missions operating on African soil. That's one. Two, delay responses and bureaucratic limitations during crisis. External political interests that sometimes overshadow local needs, and dependency on international funding with limited domestic control. We must be honest to ourselves. Many African citizens feel like spectators in decisions made about their own security. The sovereignty dilemma is more than a war. It is a principle. African nations seek to build peace on their own terms. But when peacekeeping forces act without significant consultation or fail to integrate local traditions and solutions, as the regional chairman of the West Africa Youth Assembly, I must emphasize, peace is not only about borders, it is about people. Youth-led peace efforts, grassroots mediation, and regional initiatives like those by ECOWAS, the African Union are showing promise. But we need more. More African-led missions is what we need. More investment in African training and logistics, and more trust in African leadership and youth voices. And let me give this message to our partners, to our European counterparts and the Chinese colleagues as well, and other global partners following this great platform. Africa welcomes genius collaboration, but not dependency. We need partnership, not prescriptions. Our communities are asking for support that strengthens our capacity, not replaces it. In conclusion, this panel today is not just an academic discussions. It is a real-life dialogue about the future of peace in Africa. On behalf of the West Africa Youth Assembly, let us be open, respectful, and bold. Let's reimagine peacekeeping together with Africa at the center, not the sideline. Let me say thank you to my dear colleagues, and you can have the platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manuel. That was an amazing introduction. So I would like to hear now what is something that fascinated me, and one of the reasons why we decided to organize this event, which is something that is not heard a lot, even if there is a huge and growing contribution to peacekeeping operation by the Chinese side, but often the particular views on peacekeeping operations, Chinese views are ignored. So I'm super happy and to welcome Yiyi Chen to the floor and to tell us more about it.
Thank you. So the thing is that first of all, I have to say I'm very glad to have this opportunity to share some Chinese scholars' views on peacekeeping, especially in the area of Africa. And also, I will bring out some views from the Chinese peacekeeper, as I have already I have already done some interviews with this peacekeeping police, peacekeeping soldiers, the things, people like that. So, but today I will give you a short, very short presentation. Actually, I don't want to make my presentation very serious, but this title is a topic our Chinese scholars really want to focus on. Cause why? Basically, we always think that peacekeeping is a security thing. It's a pure security thing. All the final target of the peacekeeping is just want to make the post-conflict country, I mean the war-torn country, back to peace. But however, the Chinese scholar want to always believe that there should be some correlation between the security issue and then the development issue. And so we just always wondering if there could be some of the unintended consequences bring up by the peacekeeping. So we want to know if peacekeeping could contribute to the economic recovery of the conflict-affected country. So that's why I have this research. So I will do it one by one. Okay, so this is a PDF version. Okay, as we have already said that in some of the area where the peacekeeping is deployed, such as South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, the conflict management techniques are not always unique, just like only peacekeeping or only third-party mediation, only bilateral negotiation. No, they are mixed together, especially in the political and economic ways. And then second, we just want to pay some attention to the security and the stability issues rather than development issues for the existing research. Sorry, I will do it the presentation model. So our question is that what are the consolidated impacts of the FDI? Because we always know that peacekeeping is just want to make a good environment for this post-conflict countries to attract more foreign direct investment, things like that. So we just want to know if this combination of the FDI and peacekeeping really could encourage the development of the conflict-affected countries, and is there any differences between this consolidated impacts with peacekeeping and the individual impacts of the FDI alone? Is there any differences between them? So the state of art, I will just skip this part because it's just a very traditional literature review things. So let's just cut to the point to our core argument. That we just suppose that the individual effects of the FDI to the conflict-affected countries' economic recovery is positive, because we have threefold reasons. The FDI per se is the inflow of the foreign capital, and FDI when there are FDI, so the local development of the local markets could be possible, especially for the human resources. FDI could raise the employment rate, and also FDI could bring in the new technology for the local development. However, these individual effects could be conditioned by the deployment of peacekeeping. Our logic are also threefold-loaded. Because first, there is a self-selection effect in our study, which means that the deployment of the peacekeeping operation is always to the countries which is least developed, or to the countries is most leaded area. I mean the countries but in worse condition in comparison to the other countries which have the conflict. So this is a self-selection, which means that peacekeeping always do the tough job instead of the easy one. So when there is a peacekeeping, there is a signal. So in international politics, there is a signal sent to the international investors that this country is very dangerous, at least for now. So the self-selection process would make peacekeeping be negative to the inflows of FDI. So this is the first flow. The second thing is that, of course, the deployment of peacekeeping, I have already interviewed some of the Chinese peacekeeping police and peacekeeping soldiers, the Chinese peacekeepers. They told me that the mandates, the multi-dimensional peacekeeping by now, some primary mandates of the peacekeeping is just to reorganize the social order and just cut down the border side to ensure that the inner security could be guaranteed. So this kind of things is maybe good for the reorganizing of the social order, but I don't think it's good for the social economic activity. So that's maybe the two-sided swords to the social development. So that's the second reason. The third one is that even if the FDI go into the local market of the country, okay, where the peacekeeping operation is deployed, so the thing is that peacekeeping troops can only be deployed to certain areas which is most in need, but not the entirety of the country. So the investor, the FDI inflows always go to flow this deployment of the peacekeeping. So they just go after it. So it just contributes or leads to the further inequality issue within the country by the different area. So this is a conditional effect. Maybe negative effects. So our arguments basically have I will do it in two hypotheses. The first, if we take the inflow of FDI alone, so I suppose that economic recovery of the conflict-affected countries will be good. However, when there is a deployment of the peacekeeping operations, so at this time of point, then the FDI go in, altogether, the economic recovery of the conflict-affected countries will be negative. How do we just test this hypothesis? We have some data and variables. We just collect some data from 51 African countries from 1992 to 2018. And then our measurements, the outcome variable is the economic performance of the conflict-affected countries. We use the nighttime nights. Why we use it? Because sometimes, especially for the conflict-affected countries, the GDP is seriously inflated. So we just don't believe in it. So we use the nighttime nights as the main measurements for the economic performance. And then the explanatory variables are the deployment of peacekeeping. This is the FDI level of the country. And this is peacekeeping. And I will just skip this technical issue and go directly to the outcome. And I do some visualization of our data analysis. And you can see from this picture that these two lines, the first line is the nighttime nights before and after the peacekeeping. You can see the vertical dashed line. This is a line to indicate the prior and the post the deployment of the peacekeeping, and this line is just for the economic performance. What we can see is that the positive contribution or the positive effects from the FDI before peacekeeping is just sometimes above average, sometimes is below the average. I mean, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. However, after the deployment of peacekeeping, then these effects go directly into the negative way. And also, we have the same thing in GDP measurement. And also, let's do another one. We use some country. Sorry, so for this slide is super simple, so I didn't label these countries. We just collect some country level data from the DRC, DR Congo, and we find the same pattern we have from the general data set. And I mean, this result is just the first results of our funding. We will do some further case studies, but for Chinese scholars, we always want to pay attention that could peacekeeping be more positive for the entire security of the country? Because you know that if you want to have the lasting peace for a country, it should not be the security keeper so known in this country, but it should make people feel good about their life. So the economy or the development is super important. And we find that in some times, peacekeeping or the unique deployment, if you only deployment peacekeeping to some country, these effects may be not a positive one, but a negative one instead. So for our policy implications, maybe we think that instead of taking peacekeeping or loan, maybe it would be a good strategy to use the mixed conflict management technique to guarantee the long-lasting peace of the conflict-affected countries, such as bilateral negotiation plus peacekeeping plus good offices or something else. Yes, I know this. Sorry, so this is a super short presentation, and I hope this presentation will be would take some will make you some take away points. It will be good. Yes, and last point I just want to say is that it's been 10 years that I live the Europe, but when I study in Germany, I find that most of my classmates and most of my colleagues and also my cohorts, they really focus on the conflict management issue. And I think it's interesting. So that's why I always go on for this peacekeeping and conflict management. And also it's very nice to discuss with you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The presentation were perfect, and it gave a great point, which probably many of us did never heard. I will proceed with Professor Kaunert. Welcome to the floor.
Hello, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here with you today. So thank you so much for having me and for inviting me. I want to present a little bit of my own work, and here, given the topic, I thought I'll present a little bit from a co-authored book that I authored together with Dr. Edwin Edzirka for, and the book is basically about securitization outside of the West and West Africa security. Here, particularly looking at what does security mean in the West African context, how do we understand it, and then at the end we can also have a little bit of a reflection in terms of Europe's role in all of that. But my talk will be mainly focusing a little bit on our book. So basically, it starts with a question of what is security in international relations more generally, and then we'll be looking at West African security context in more detail. What is security in general? There's different interpretations, of course, in terms of security. Initially, the idea started from a more narrow definition of security, focusing really practically on the more strategic kind of war aspect of security. But over the last couple of years, really the concept of security has broadened quite significantly, already starting from the 1990s onwards. But really then subsequently to that, it has really significantly broadened. Today's risks are in fact multidimensional. We can talk about a variety of different risks that are inherent, and this is not only, of course, in Africa or in Europe. This is right across the globe, if you like. And specifically here also, we have the so-called security development nexus, the security development nexus that increasingly acknowledges that security is essential. It's an essential aspect for development, for economic development also. But likewise, development is an important dimension also of security. And it is essential in order to fight, in a sense, insecurity. So development is really an important dimension of that. So we have a number of different security challenges that we can, in general, talk about. I won't be talking about all of them. I just throw them out there for now. And then obviously one of the things that I do a lot in my work is to look at terrorism and counterterrorism. As of more recently, a number of people have focused also on the issue of nuclear proliferation, but very important issues of security challenges are also issues like global warming, climate security. Not so long ago, we were dealing, of course, with COVID-19 and health security. The whole issue of pandemics is obviously a very, very important aspect here as well. So it is something that we really need to take much, much more seriously. In terms of security, we can say that it's an essentially contested concept. An essentially contested concept here because it's a concept that whose meaning is inherently a matter of dispute. There's no neutral definition as such possible. So hence a number of different people have argued that it is essentially a contested concept. Not everyone would agree with that. Some people would disagree, particularly realist school of thought. Here, they might very well disagree with what I've just said. But nonetheless, we have settled in our book as security as an essentially contested concept. The roots of that debate really link back to the end of the Cold War period, an emergence of what we called a new security order at the end of the Cold War, and a number of scholars really being quite unhappy with how during the entire time of the Cold War, with the focus primarily on nuclear proliferation, on basically the bipolar structure between the Soviet Union and the United States, how we've overlooked a lot of different aspects of security, of peace, and looking at, in a sense, to reconceptualize those foundations of our discipline in terms of strategy, security, and an attempt to make that discipline more relevant to contemporary concerns here, in particular on practical aspects also, practical applications here of security theories. Now, this led to a larger trend in security studies, a trend that we then look at much more significantly in our book, That is, firstly, the broadening of the security agenda, that is, the inclusion of new security threats and new issues, such as economic issues, such as environmental issues, such as migration, transnational crime, diseases, health, pandemics, human rights, on the security agenda, being important to be discussed, and that is obviously something that we'll be discussing in more detail also when it comes to Africa, but at the same time also a deepening of the security agenda. Here, in particular, the inclusion of new, what we call referent objects of security, so meaning, for instance, a focus not only on the state, not only on state security, but on individual security, security of human beings, security of society, security of the region. So to really look at it in a much more holistic way, so that we're not only focusing on the security of states, but really looking at individuals on their human security dimension. Why should we do that? Why should we not just say, well, realists would say, well, taking this away from what we've traditionally looked at will make the academic discipline more intellectually incoherent, practically irrelevant. If you wanted to have somebody who would say that, you might ask Professor Mersheimer, Professor Wald. They would probably tell you that we shouldn't really look at that in more detail. But we are suggesting that we should, and particularly relevant in the African context, as I get to very soon. Our approach here is there is no objective world distinct from what as scholars, what as academics we suggest is the collective construction of actors, and therefore there's no such thing as an objective knowledge in world politics. We are looking at using interpretive methods of research, and we are providing contextual understanding here rather than just building of theory. So in our book, really, what we've then looked at here in the West African context is looking at an archaeology of knowledge in terms of securitization of Africa. We engage with the debate in terms of getting the academic discipline of securitization and of security studies away from its Eurocentrism, wanting to make it more relevant also in terms of its context that is more deeply embedded in Africa, and therefore engaging also with concepts such as ontological security, and particularly the West African context. In a book, we provided for a new securitization framework, a framework here really dealing with the issues outside of the West, trying to take a perspective that is not deliberately Western, trying to take a perspective that looks at it from a local context, looking at it here in terms of the securitization neo-patrimonial nexus, looking at the state structures as they exist and the kind of societal structures that are now prevalent. We looked at a number of different cases in our book. So for instance, we looked at Liberia and securitization processes there. We've looked at Sierra Leone and the context here in particular in Sierra Leone. And we looked more recently also at the role of pandemics, health security in Western Africa, looking from a variety of different health security threats from early ages like HIV, AIDS, and Ebola to what is more recently, of course, COVID-19 and the importance of health security there. In our book, we particularly based it on, as I mentioned, the securitization framework, the Copenhagen School, Barry Buzan and Ole Wever, with their preeminent work on People, States, and Fear in 1983 that talks about the widening of the security agenda, here in particular the 5 sectors of security: military, political, economic, societal, and environmental, and that looks at a security dynamic at 3 different levels, from the sub-state to the state level and to the international system, thereby providing us with the opportunity to widen the discipline and deepen the discipline at the same time. Securitization in this context is a speech act. It goes from the general observation that a security issue is not a security issue because it is inherently so, but because it is a socially constructed activity that is basically an issue that becomes securitized when it's presented as an existential threat, requiring emergency measures and justifying actions outside of the normal bounds of political procedure. It goes into the speech act, the power of the spoken word in the language in the process of securitization, and includes different actors, such as the securitizing actor, a person in place of authority and influence, a threat, an issue that poses an existential threat, and an audience that must be convinced to accept it for the process to be complete. It's been seen as somewhat of an Eurocentric nature, Eurocentric in application, and thereby perhaps not so applicable, if you like, for context of a non-Western nature. We've reconceptualized the concept here, particularly when it comes to state structures in West Africa. We looked more deeply at the idea of statehood, the Bavarian framework of statehood, and the Westphalian construct, as it were, with characteristics of defined territory, government, and sovereignty. And we built a new framework around, if you like, trying to find a framework that basically shifts securitization from that level of Eurocentrism and, in a sense, shifts it towards a framework that is truly more applicable to the local context, that deals with issues that are really, in a sense, felt by humans, by exercising their human security in a particular context. Now, we start from the observation that security here relies on an ontological security. We start from the notion that we need to reformulate security for a specific political environment, for a specific context. And of course, African security, West Africa here in particular for our book, is a function that links it to general global events, but has a very local dimension that really needs to be taken into account when we look at security issues, whether they include issues such as migration, whether they include poverty, whether they include cross-border crimes, whether they include terrorism, and so on. And the discourse becomes critical here because it is of a heightened interest for actors that also cross borders, and it is generally surrounded sometimes with suspicions. We saw that when we look at the issue of COVID-19 in particular, that was seen significantly as a European security issue that had nothing to do with the Western African context, and was being treated by a lot of people in that particular way. So if I then continue in terms of our case studies, we looked at, for instance, the case study of Liberia. We looked at the case study of Sierra Leone, where we analyzed the West African threat perception that starts with independence and with the independence years, where we looked at it from the lens of preserving that hard-won independence. Here, of course, the legacy of colonialism is something that is very important, and the politics of state survival that continues to a certain extent to this day, that links back to the legacy of its very early days. It's one that is in unanimity against any external aggression and any interstate aggression, and that relies on a politics of affinity, you can call it, or we call it in our book, politics of affinity, that links it to what some people call a neo-patrimonial statehood. Neo-patrimonial statehood that links back to a patron-client relationship, that colors how threats are being perceived, and that in a sense, influence the securitization process, and that influences also in terms of how this is being perceived by the audience. When we look at the specific cases here, Liberia or Sierra Leone, we see that, of course, in the 1990s, we had significant crises in West Africa, starting with Liberia. That also gave birth to the ECOWAS monitoring group. However, nothing in the treaty initially prepared the community for this particular implosion that we saw. We see the execution of an intervention that ultimately exposed certain neo-patrimonial links, affiliation interests amongst certain leaders. We see links, for instance, if we look at some of the neighboring countries, clearly in terms of Nigeria and Liberia, same with Nigeria and Sierra Leone, Liberia and Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso. So threat perception, securitization processes, as we outline it in our chapters, were linked as a function of those filial connections and interests. When we then look at the more recent case study, and I will end fairly soon after this, when we look at HIV, but in general, when we look at health security, when we look at the role of pandemics, we see that health issues in Africa generally were viewed and are viewed and securitized as a threat to the West, meaning that it's primarily linked to the West and as a result of that global mobility. So in a sense, Africa is seen as a derivative of the threat that is posed towards the West, and true global mobility then ultimately arrives in Africa, which then leads to a certain element of conspiracy, suspicion, perhaps a mindset that is perceived to be neo-colonial in terms of various diseases. We can see that, for instance, when it comes to HIV in its early days, that was considered as a threat because it affects the Western population primarily, is not something that is particularly linked to the African or West African context, not because it decimates the local population, the military and expatriates, etc., etc. We see something similar when it comes to Ebola. Ebola initially seen as a strategy by governments to secure fundings from foreign donors, also as seen as a way to reduce African population because of natural resources. And in a similar way, we then see when COVID-19 arrives, that is also equally surrounded in similar suspicions, seen and perceived as what is a foreign disease, perhaps even a European disease, even though, of course, it originates actually not in Europe, but it is perceived as such because that's when the outbreak happens very, very significantly. We see that campaigns then that are linked to vaccinations were perceived with a lot of doubts and so on as a kind of a Western agenda, ultimately, because again, we see the Western element here in terms of the vaccination campaigns and so on. So we see that being perceived in a similar way and in a similar light. So it is linked then to a particular perception that security is ultimately a Western concept, is ultimately a Western understanding, and it's not something for the local context in that particular way. It is seen with suspicion. So I think I'll end on that note. I feel free to ask many more questions. There's many more things that I can say, but I want to give us enough time that we can also discuss this in more detail. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I find it extremely interesting, and it can reconnect to a lot of things. Personally, part of my research is on information warfare, and many of the elements you cited, especially in West Africa, the use of medicine and the health concerns has been extremely weaponized also recently, like COVID-19, and not considering it the source of this information can definitely be something that maybe realist students might be missing out on. So thank you so much. And now I will call to the floor Ambassador Emmanuel Chea.
Yes, I'm following.
Yes. Do you wanna? We're curious about if you wanted to explore some of the what has been in this moment expressed as the African perspective. There's been at least a lot of talk on African solutions to African problems, which is something that is often spoken a lot about. But do we see that in practice? What is the way forward, in your opinion, with peacekeeping and security operations in Africa?
Yes. So as I said, we see that possible because we provided a lot of way forward. We said this time around, Africa must be at the center of everything that happened. They don't have to be at the sideline. We observe how ECOWAS have done extremely well in Liberia. You listen to the last speaker, they did us research, and ECOWAS did well in Liberia, ranging from the war of 1998. ECOWAS helped to stabilize peace in Liberia, during the administration of Olusegun Obasanjo, former president of Nigeria, and then was chairing ECOWAS. And then we also saw the effort from ECOWAS in Mali. Before Mali could withdraw from ECOWAS, we saw the kind of effort ECOWAS all taking leaders, taking military in Mali to help hold against the juntas, and we saw the kind of stability that went in Mali. We also saw that in Sierra Leone as well. We saw the kind of work ECOWAS did. So one of the most important things is that when these things are ongoing, and then you have international partners coming in, like the United Nations, like the European Union. The concern of African, the concern and the recommendation for us young people is that in this kind of peace dialogue, peace mediation process, it is important, even that's the challenge ECOWAS face as well. They carry on this mediation process, they carry on this dialogue. They don't involve young people. If you look at the sub-region, if you look at statistics, they have been proving that the young people are dominant in West Africa. So our own recommendation is Africa must be placed at the center stage because they are the direct beneficiary of those or peace you are breaking in Africa. So those people that are benefiting, they should be part. Practically, they will be able to embrace it. If their traditions are evolved, if their elders are evolved, you will see the European counterparts and our American counterparts going to bring to us. But whenever you leave these people on the sideline and then you just prefer them just saying yes sir to everything in the African way, we would not experience what we want to achieve. We will not achieve it. So that thing, Africa to be involved in the center stage of everything will help mitigate the challenges we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel like now it's a good time to move to the discussion floor. I believe there are a lot of questions people might wanna ask. So I will start with one. My first one is directed to both Professor, more towards Professor Kaunert and Mr. Chea. Because we've seen you've Mr. Chea, you have nominated, you talked about Mali, which is a striking example of when there has been a failure of these security operations. There has been a lot of lament around it. Both Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger withdrew from ECOWAS and have criticized heavily the security operations that have been run on the country as ineffective, accused of facilitating the survival of the terrorist insurgents group because not active enough. What do you think might be something that should be that we should learn from this mistake? Something that has been not looked at, something that you think is key to understanding this issue? Professor Kaunert, you want to start?
Sorry, I thought that question was directed at my colleague. Sorry. Could you just ask me the
what do you think should be a lesson or something that's been that we should learn from the failures we've seen in the Sahel region recently, and the various criticism that the missions there have received?
Yes, I think it's a difficult one. I mean, there's a lot of different lessons, right? I mean, one of the things that we found is obviously, and we find that everywhere on the African continent, there's a legacy of colonialism, and I think that runs deep. I think we need to acknowledge that. I think all actors need to acknowledge that. As much as we would like to kind of say, look, like Alessandro, for instance, you didn't have anything to do with it because you're young. I think I'm young enough to say that I also didn't. But of course, there's a historical legacy, and the historical legacy exists. And I think that is something that we found in those particular contexts. In Mali, you saw that, but you saw that also in others, Burkina Faso and wherever else you might look. That legacy is there, and it's not a positive legacy. It's not a positive legacy that leads to us being able to work as cooperatively as we would like. I think it's a lesson that I don't think we can do anything about immediately, but it is something that needs to be acknowledged and in a sense to be tackled head on. Secondly, I think we also need to acknowledge, while having acknowledged that it needs to come more from the local context. So what we need to acknowledge is that, okay, of course, we have our own interests as Europeans in terms of how we cooperate and what we want to, in a sense, cooperate on. And I think that is, normal for every actor. But I think there needs to be a certain element of an acknowledgement that those things cut both ways, right? And obviously, if we're looking at Mali, if we're looking at other countries in the region, they also have their own interests, and they also have a willingness and an actorness to really express those interests and to insist on those interests also. And I think that is something that is very, very important. And I think when you start from that basis and you kind of say, look, we are acknowledging these things, then I think you're in better shape to be then dealing with some of the issues, with some of the security issues. So, for instance, like I was mentioning in terms of COVID-19, if you're going to be looking at that security issue, then having addressed those issues, then you're more able to say, okay, look, let's try the vaccinations because they are going to provide us with a certain amount of health benefit, right? That is something that can benefit the country, that can benefit the local context and so on, while acknowledging your limitations as an actor. And I think that is something that you just need to acknowledge, because once you acknowledge it, actually you can provide for a more cooperative environment. I think there's a lot of individual lessons when we look at different operations, obviously, that we could be talking for hours now, and what went wrong, why certain countries didn't have the impact that they thought they were going to have, why they were not perceived as the kind of that was going to bring peace, that was going to able to counter the terrorism a problem that clearly exists, that was able to counter all of those kind of issues. But it starts kind of from that basis, I would suggest.
Thank you. Mr. Chea, I'm curious also of your perspective on this matter.
Yeah. Yes. So what happened is that the withdrawal of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from ECOWAS as foreign members is that in the ECOWAS region, ECOWAS imposes immune sanctions on Burkina Faso, and that alone, Burkina Faso addressed ECOWAS on issues that the Western influence sanctions in response to the military coup wasn't good, because the idea that the Westerners have so many influence on ECOWAS, and they accuse ECOWAS of the kind of session ECOWAS put on them. So at the end of the day, they have to withdraw and establish their own institution called the Alliance of Share States. And when that was launched, we saw what happened to ECOWAS. ECOWAS lost approximately 76 billion, according to statistics in recent time from ECOWAS. 76 million people, over half of its land and area. And these are weakening ECOWAS' ability to fight terrorism and be able to settle the state, because one of the objectives of ECOWAS is to stabilize our region, but at the end of the day is creating problem right now in the region. So I think one thing that ECOWAS is lacking, and that is bringing problem in our region, that we have to look at carefully, is that I'm trying to lay my hand on this thing, is inconsistent political will. You know, ECOWAS has struggled with political division among the 15 member states. Some leaders prioritize national interests or foreign alliance over regional cooperation, and there are often a lack of unity in responding to crises like coup, like constitutional manipulation, and other electoral violence in our sub-region. So ECOWAS need to work on these things. The next thing is that the weak enforcement of democratic rule of law. These are things that are causing problem in the sub-region, because ECOWAS have declared support for democracy, but they have failed to consistently enforce it. And whenever ECOWAS cannot enforce proper democratic or rulings in the sub-region, there will always be crisis. Some countries in the bloc tempted with constitutions to extend presidential terms. Like just a few days ago, we are getting a news in Cote d'Ivoire that Alassane Ouattara want to contest for the next term, and ECOWAS is sitting there. They are not talking. When the citizens start raising up issues, when politicians start raising up issues and start going against the kind of information coming up, that's the time they will go in, and they will go in pretend to protect those leaders. And I think these are mistakes they are making. With our strong political penalties coming on those leaders that at the end of the day will lead those countries. So we experienced that in Mali, we experienced that in Burkina Faso, and today we are seeing the withdrawal of Mali and Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, ECOWAS are acted harshly towards military regime, creating a perception of double standards. We saw it in Guinea. Right now, Guinea members, they are part of the ECOWAS parliament. I mean, that it's not something we have to praise ECOWAS on, because you cannot go against a military leadership. Then today you have Guinean leaders that every day, every year they will extend time for election, but we have their parliament members right now at the level of the ECOWAS parliament. So the next issue I will look at again is that it's post-security response and slow action. Insecurity emergency, for example, coup, urgency, ECOWAS is often slow to intervene or lack effective tools. Its military and diplomatic response are sometimes delayed or reactive or symbolically rather than proactive. So these are things ECOWAS need to get on their feet. They have to make that wonderful institution that are being cherished within the West Africa region and be recognized in the entire world. They have to get on their feet to do more. They have to deliver the good that the young people expect of them. So in conclusion, the lack of grassroots inclusion and youth voices is one of the things we have been pushing in the ECOWAS region. ECOWAS is seen as elite driven with little youth, civil society, or women participation in decision making. So whenever you are not prioritizing these people, at the end of the day, you always see yourself in other crises. Many West Africans feel disconnected from its agenda, institutions, and policies. Youth-led organizations and citizen movement are often ignored and undermined. Today, we can give you an example in the European nations. Today, we have the European Youth Parliament that is making significant effort towards the growth of the EU member states. Today, we have so many EU networks that are being supported by the European Union. But you don't have that in the ECOWAS region. These are concerns young people have been raising. So if you are bringing women and youth voices, you're bringing CSOs on the table, on your mediation process, in leadership, in decision-making, we will not experience the kind of thing we are experiencing, because these young people, they will learn the kind of leadership you want, they will learn from you positively, and they will help implement a sound leadership for the next 50 to 60 years. But today we saw ECOWAS celebrated 50 years with low participation of youth, with low participation of CSO in decision making, with low participation of women. So these kind of things, they are affecting ECOWAS in their decisions, in their peacekeeping processes, inadequate regional security framework. The ECOWAS standby force lack proper funding, equipment, and political will. The region still relies on foreign troops, France, and etc., to fight insurgency. When ECOWAS need to take responsibility on their own, they have the natural resources. Whenever they empower those people, whenever they empower the young people, you will not need external troops to come in to defend your territory. It can work, you see. So coordination between ECOWAS and EU or within ECOWAS itself is often weak again. So these things, they have to work properly. And I think when the region move forward, there will be a lot of prospect in the West Africa region. So again, I want to say thank you. And if there's any other question, we can come in to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chea. That was a fantastic response. Now I will open the floor to questions from you, from the many participants. So thanks so much to be here. And I will say, first, you can raise your hand or send a message on the chat. I saw there is already one. I invite Federico Valotto to, if he wants to open the mic and ask the question himself and direct it towards whichever speaker you would like to ask it.
So yeah, thank you very much. Sorry for the camera, but still for the same reason I cannot turn it on. I really appreciate all the interventions of all the panelists, and I think it's a good mix between I would say academic literature and also experience from the ground. So on both ways, really interesting to hear what are the different feedbacks about that from different sides of the world, and how how all of them are interacting together. So I mean, this event was organized by different youth organization. I also represent one, IMSISS Corporation, but also European 𝐒𝐤𝐞𝐫𝐬 or 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿. And so I was wondering, okay, after this event, I'm asking, of course, to the professors mostly that maybe have some broad experience on that can give us an inspiration on that. But in general, I'm asking to all the panelists as well, which one should be the main key points, or I mean, maybe there's no one reply. So what in your opinion should be the points that we as youth organizations should stress in our advocacy activity to promote the peacekeeping activity in Africa? And how can we, as an international organization, give the contribution on that? Because sometimes I feel that there is a little bit of a lack of possibilities of things that we can do, but at the same time, there is a lot of willingness. So yeah, I'm asking mostly to the two professors if they have some suggestions for us to operate. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the long delay to my answer. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much, Federico. I would say, Professor Yiyi, do you want to start with answering this question?
Oh yeah. Moment. So thanks very much, Federico, for your this very good question. Because the role of the IO in the peacekeeping process is very important. You know that the most important organization is for sure the United Nations for the peacekeeping. And to our experience, I mean, for my study, I find that also European Union and African Union, and also in our Asia, the ASEAN also played a very critical role in the peacekeeping operations. However, I find that maybe the international organizations plays different roles in peacekeeping. So the thing is that I think the most important function of the IO is just soliciting the attention of the international community to focus on this kind of issue. Because we know it's clear that let's take the UN peacekeeping as the example. For the UN peacekeeping part, so the three most important part is just the personnel. I mean the peacekeepers. So the personnel suppliers are always the countries, because the UN does not have its own troops. The second is the funding. Funding is always supported by the member states. So it is very clear that the first 2 points are definitely supported by the individual countries around the world. But the third one is just to build up the international attention, to solicit the international attention, attract the international attention to this issue, to this event, to the deployment process. Cause the conflict affected countries should know that their situation received the worldwide attention. So that's the responsibility for the international organization. I think this is the most important one. So I will take. So that's my short answer. Yes.
Thank you so much. Professor Kaunert, do you wanna?
Right. No, I think that was a great answer, and that my colleague already mentioned. I think what you could add to that perhaps is really to insist on a human security dimension, that this is about, not about geopolitical stuff. This is not about necessarily state security. This is about individuals and humans and their sense of security. And I think that is something that I think we might find that more people can link up to that than what we might realize if we really insist on that particular dimension. I think it's something that youth in particular have a specific voice, right? They can define what is important to them, and they can get involved in the process of defining what is security for them, and how do they feel secure? How do they, in a sense, develop that aspect further? So I think that is really the point where they can be strong and forceful and say what it is that they need. And I think that is a good avenue. I think that is also more likely to be heard.
Sorry.
you.
So just to add up a point to the Professor Christine. That's right. I really agree with this point that the youth is very important in this kind of things, that which give me a very impressive point is that when about 3 months ago I took a short the research visiting to the Kazakhstan, and I found that the youth have a more tight connection, closer connection between each other in comparison to the other age. So also in the security part, also in the security connection part, I also find that the youth can find more similarities with each other. So I think I agree with the Professor Christian that the youth can play a very important role in this process, especially to gather, to attract the international attention. Yes. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you. It was a great answer. If anyone else has an answer, other questions, you can raise the hand or ask on the group chat. In the meanwhile, I have personally a couple of ones where I was really interested in knowing what you thought. The first one was to Professor Yiyi Chen. you've talked about how a big role of peacekeeping operations is in a way of acting on the social order of the country they are established in, and often also try to act on the political order, because to fix the security issue, they're often related or almost always related to the internal political situation of a country. But how does this, seeing in a world where China will take a more and more important role in these efforts, how will this be able to cope with China's fundamental principle of non-intervention?
I have to admit that this one is super interesting question, and I have to admit that there is a gap. I don't know if this is the case in the other countries, but I really find there is a gap. I mean, I don't know if it's a research gap or there's something else in the Chinese academia and the Chinese peacekeeper. So basically, we don't interact with each other not so oftentimes. So we just so what I said subsequently will be on behalf of the Chinese academia that as for Chinese government, we have the standing point that is a non-interference in the conflict affected countries. But the thing is that if we send our troops, or we just send our peacekeepers in the name of the IO, I mean the international organization, because such as under the name of the United Nations, or under the name of the ASEAN security ties, things like that. So it does not have some relations with the Chinese government's non-intervention issue. So in this point, it could be deal with this kind of things smoothly. However, Chinese government does not send its troops independently. I mean, it does not organize peacekeeping operations independently to the other countries. So I think I think from my point, I think this is the rule of the Chinese government. But I really need to conform this point to the security guys of the troops later on. Yes, so that's my short answer. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And for
Yeah.
Professor Kapp, I found your points on non-traditional security extremely interesting, but I was curious, you mentioned a lot of them. What is something that you find a non-traditional security issue that is become more and more impactful in general, or maybe specific to West Africa, which doesn't get enough attention?
Oh, there's really a lot of them, actually. I think if we're looking at how things matter both in terms of Europe, but also in terms of West Africa, there's clearly migration is a very important issue for both sides. It goes into issues like human trafficking. It goes into issues that are linked to that. There's very serious issues here in terms of transnational organized crime. There's issues in terms of banditry, organized gangs. There are issues obviously also linked to terrorism, I think, but that gets plenty of attention. So I think that is not something that we are unaware of. But we have smaller issues also in terms of various types of crimes, actually, that happens a lot. We're looking at cybersecurity issues. So we have like a whole range of issues, and that's not even to go into health security and a number of other things that are clearly not getting enough attention. So there's food security issues at times. So there's a lot of different things that we need to discuss.
Thank you. I find your point on immigration particularly interesting, as almost all of the Western in West Africa, at least in the Sahel, almost all the Western forces were kicked out. The only mission that remained present in Africa is the Italian one, and because it's so much focused less than on trying to secure for the immigration routes. Okay, we got a question. Giorgia, do you want to ask it or do I read it?
No. Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you for the panelists. Yeah, it was really actually interesting. And my question is more about like to what extent actually what is claimed to be natural in terms of like this peacekeeping cooperation can like in the result the actually natural. For example, like to what extent, like when a country, for example, from Europe or in the case of South China, like they go to another country in Africa and they want to, in quotes, bring peace. Actually, this bringing peace is more connected to their, like, let's say, materialistic or economic financial interest in the country itself. Also because like there's been a set of like, for example, human rights violations that we saw from Europe with the Rwanda genocide and all this kind of situation. So I was wondering, like, yeah, how do we actually improve this? I don't know. Yeah. Also, yeah, the question is for all the panelists. So yeah.
Professor Kaunert, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can give it a stab. Certainly, peacekeeping, I guess, if you're thinking about what is involved in peacekeeping, so for instance, you are sending soldiers, essentially. You're sending people that that have to defend something, and you're sending them into a mission. Well, ideally, is keeping the peace, but sometimes they're not just doing that. There's all sorts of potential issues involved in that. So you're sending them into a mission that could be potentially quite dangerous. So in that sense, the idea that it can be entirely neutral is probably difficult, because obviously for a country to take a decision to do that, it's an important decision. That what if something happens? We've had many peacekeeping missions that turned out to be disastrous, right? And people get killed, and then there's obviously a whole problem then back home. Why did you allow this? How did you allow this? And so on. So it's very, very difficult ultimately to have this in a vacuum, to have this in a totally neutral space, because ultimately it's a very important decision when you're sending soldiers. So in that sense, it's inherently systemic part of the problem. It's inherently systemic because those that are then willing to send soldiers, they're going to have to do that because there's a certain element of an interest involved, because otherwise you're not going to convince a public to go there interest-free. But I think the question then is in terms of overtness of that interest pursuit, right? How overtly do you pursue that interest pursuit? And I think that's where you can kind of debate a little bit more, kind of what you can probably resolve some of the issues with that. But I think to have it completely neutral, free, I think I'm not sure that we can get there. And I don't think that's even a Western problem. I think that's a human problem. So in that sense, I'm not entirely sure that this is possible.
Thank you so much. Professor Yiyi, do you have an answer for this?
Yes, thank you. I just want to have a short response to one aspect for Georgia's question is why countries are motivated to send human resources, I mean the peacekeepers, to the peacekeeping host countries. So it depends. I have to say it depends. You know that for some European countries, just like Sweden or Norway, of course, their national strategy is just to play the role as the peacekeeper or the peacemaker. So from their point of view, they feel it's just their responsibility to send some peacekeepers to these countries. However, to some developing countries, sending troops or the sending police or the sending observers is a business. Cause the thing is that you know that the United Nations. Let's take the United Nations peacekeeping as an example. Cause the United Nations has a relatively higher stipend. I mean, it's about let me say it's about 1,700 dollars per month for the stipend. So it's much higher than the developing countries people's salary. So they send troops, they send soldiers, police. It's just for the business. So that's why we can see that the largest contributors for the peacekeepers today is from Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, the things. And also for some of the other countries, just like for United States, China, I mean the permanent not member of the Security Council. So it's just their responsibility to send country. I mean, in the 1990s, US was the largest contributor for the peacekeeping. However, after the things in Somalia, the peacekeeping in Somalia, some of the US soldiers were killed dead for the peacekeeping. You know, the United States is really sensitive for the human deaths, for the soldiers' deaths, so they never did it again. So nowadays, for the non-permanent member of the Security Council, they just use sending peacekeepers as a signal or the symbol that I have already done it. So that's all. Thank you. So that's why they send the peacekeepers. So it depends. Yes. Thank you very much.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. And I see we have a raised hand between the participants. Mr. 𝐒𝐤𝐞𝐫𝐬, do you wanna ask a question?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. Am I clear?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot to the organizers for putting this together and to the speakers for the insights shared thus far. I think my question, I had a lot of questions, mind you, but I'm trying to distill them into one. So with that, I think it's not one necessarily focused on policy, but to power rather than the frameworks and the future authorship. So time and again, understandably, we sort of see Africa failing to be the author of its own peace architecture. It sort of remains a character in somebody else's strategic theater, but struggles to form the leader when it comes to its subject of peacekeeping strategies. So I think it's universally fair to say, as we sort of enter a new global scramble, this time not necessarily over land, but over capital, influence, security paradigms. The question before us is, I believe anyway, no longer whether Africa should participate in externally shaped peace processes, and rather how it can lead, define, and redesign them. And so my question is, how can the continent assert true strategic autonomy by transforming peacekeeping from a foreign-led intervention into an African-designed model, one rooted in, I suppose, peace through investment with the community legitimacy and long-term economic sovereignty? I mean, to humor me ever so slightly, it's sort of like, could we imagine a Pan-African peace dividend fund sort of co-financed by external actors, but governed by the African Union to support post-conflict economic sovereignty and such. I believe the likes of Congo and its chaos will subdue one day. And when it reaches that point of inertia, well, how does the civic infrastructure and job creation look like? Is that still going to be from an external party, or is it going to be from local actors? And what will that architecture of the lasting security look like? Thank you.
Thank you. That was an amazing question. Professor Kaunert, do you want to start?
I have the easy question first. The strategic autonomy question is a difficult question because obviously, as you probably have noticed, European governments have been grappling with that question over the last couple of months, and they've been grappling very hard, and they haven't really been able to answer that question fully either. They've been able to say that they need to do more, but how they're going to do this and how they're going to do this together, they haven't really given a very, very clear answer to that question. So it's not an easy one to answer when it comes to the African context. Not only in terms of the diversity of the continent. I mean, especially if you talk about the whole continent, I mean, it's difficult enough, I think, to talk, let's say, about an area like an organization like ECOWAS taking a larger role. And I think that has happened on a number of occasions that ECOWAS did take a larger role. And you can sort of see how you can potentially make some of that work by creating institutions, by creating budgets, by creating in a sense, elements of where that can go. Whether that can be then translated to the whole continent is quite another question. And whether that could be actually workable if it were encountering a very significant crisis like the one that you were just mentioning, like Congo. That is yet another question, whether even in a good case scenario where you have actually the institutional framework, you have the actors on board, you have the budgets and everything else, but when it encounters a really difficult situation like what you have there in Congo, there's a good question whether you can get there. I'd like to say that this is possible. So I'm going to end on that note that it might very well be possible, but I haven't got the answer to that. I don't know whether my colleagues might. So I'll play a little bit of ping pong there.
I think the question has been moved to you, Professor Yiyi. It's clearly a very easy question to answer it. What are your thoughts?
Basically, I think that I totally agree with the Professor Christian that strategic autonomy is a question that it's an issue that it's difficult to answer actually. That especially for from the aspect of the national capacity building of the African countries these days. Of course, you know that. For the peacekeeping things, how to say, the final target is just want to help the local autonomy go to independent gradually, but these days we find the case just as Professor Christian say in Congo, in Mali, in ECOWAS, things go to the other side, the opposite side. So the thing is that up to now I didn't do some in-depth research. I haven't done some in-depth research on this kind of thing. So let's see later on how the things goes. I will keep my eyes on this issue. But anyway, things. Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was an amazing question. Thank you. If anyone else has any other questions, we would love to hear them. If not, I feel like we've done a good hour and a half, and it was incredibly interesting to And I have last question is anyone of the speakers would like to ask a question to each other, because it's something that I often feel isn't asked, but it would be interesting. Professor,
So-
do you have any questions?
Yeah. The thing is that, course, for my part, you know that I'm a research professor. So what I do is always do the quantitative things. I just want to figure out if there is really a gap in the research of peacekeeping that, of course, I seldom find there is an opportunity for the interaction between the staff in academia on the quantitative side and on the qualitative side, especially on the practice side. On my side, what I did is always just to deal with the data analysis and then later on. But for the qualitative side, especially for the case study, practice, the research area, they always do some field work. So that's the case in China. So I was just wondering that if it is also the case in Europe or somewhere else around the world, yeah. I mean, sorry for this tedious question. Sorry.
No, that's a great question, Professor Kaunert.
Right. Let me try and see if I can. Certainly, I'll give it a try. Okay. In terms of qualitative, quantitative, I think that's like a huge debate, right? It's one, like on a personal level, I would say, I think there's a way in which those researches can go together, because I think very often what I find is that the interpretation of quantitative analysis is usually not necessarily the most the best interpretation that it can be if you don't have a qualitative understanding of the material. Also, that very often, in a sense, to do a good quantitative analysis, I think actually a good qualitative analysis should go hand in hand with it, and then I think you have a much better and much more meaningful understanding of what the data tells you. So I think in that sense, it is something that can go hand in hand. Does it do that? Not necessarily.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Cause the thing is that it has been more or less 10 years for me to do the research in peacekeeping since I graduated from the University of Constance in Germany. And for my part, I always did these quantitative things, and also I did presentations in United States, in Sweden, and also in Germany. And I found the colleagues around me, they are always doing the quantitative one. And I keep asking them, where are the practitioners? I mean, where are the researchers from this side? Where are they? So they just keep silent. So I feel from that point of time, I feel there may be some gap, especially in the research area, in the academia, between the different approaches. So now, actually, this is the first time. I'm very glad to be invited to this open-minded discussion with Professor Kaunert and other guys. So I feel it's good. Especially a good opportunity for me to open my mind to other world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Kaunert, do you have any questions by any chance?
I think I'm actually quite okay. I think we had a good discussion. And,
Yes.
Yes, I mean, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Would love to thank the speakers especially. So, Professor Chen, thank you so much for your amazing contribution. Professor Kaunert,
Thank you.
thank you so much. and also Professor to thank you to Ambassador Chea, who had to leave a few minutes ago as he has a physical meeting to attend. But it was really an amazing discussion. I'm so happy to know so well, and thank you to all the participants who joined, and even more to the ones who participated asking questions. So yeah, thank you so much. And I hope this discussion will inspire more talks about this fundamental topic, and more talks about the collaboration that needs to be brought forward between the three continents, because both because it's fundamental to talk to understand how to collaborate on issues, but also with the US retreating, I feel like we have to take in our hands even more the future of peacekeeping and the future of security. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye bye.
Bye
Good
bye.
night. Bye bye.